Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you never saw the knife coming for your back? I learned the hard way that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who hurt you the most. My name is Judith, and 4 years ago, I made what I thought was the smartest decision of my life. Fresh out of my biomedical engineering PhD, I was recruited by my former classmates Mike and David to join their startup, MedFlow Innovations. We'd been friends since undergrad, and they knew I lived and breathed medical device development. While they had the business acumen to secure funding and navigate regulations, they needed someone who could actually build what they were promising investors. "Judith, you're the genius behind this whole thing," Mike told me over coffee when they first pitched the opportunity. "We need someone who can develop a revolutionary catheter guidance system. The market's worth billions, and we're talking about saving lives here." I was hooked. Not just by the money, but by the mission. Traditional catheter procedures were still using guidance methods from the 1980s. Doctors were essentially working blind, relying on outdated imaging that led to complications, longer procedures, and sometimes permanent damage to patients. I knew we could do better. They offered me equity and a promise that still makes me sick to remember: when this patent makes money, you'll get 30% of all licensing profits. You're not just an employee, Judith. You're a founding partner. I should have gotten that in writing. For 4 years, I poured my soul into that lab. While Mike and David networked at conferences and schmoozing investors, I was there at 6 in the morning and leaving at midnight. I wasn't just developing a product, I was revolutionizing how cardiac procedures could be performed. My typical day started before sunrise. I'd arrive at the lab while the building was still dark, the only sound being the hum of the climate control systems keeping our sensitive equipment stable. I'd spend the first 2 hours reviewing data from the previous day's tests, identifying patterns that might reveal why certain sensor configurations were failing or why the magnetic field calibration drifted during longer procedures. The technical challenge was immense. I needed to create a system that could provide real-time, three-dimensional guidance for catheters inside the human heart without exposing patients to dangerous levels of radiation. Traditional imaging required multiple X-ray exposures throughout a procedure, accumulating radiation doses that concerned many physicians. My solution required integrating ultrasound technology, magnetic field sensors, and sophisticated algorithms that could process data in milliseconds while maintaining surgical precision. The early months were brutal. I'd built 17 different prototype configurations, each one failing in unique and frustrating ways. The magnetic sensors would interfere with the ultrasound imaging. The processing algorithms couldn't handle the real-time calculations fast enough. The catheter modifications made the devices too rigid for delicate cardiac work. Every solution created 3 new problems. I remember one particularly discouraging week when I'd been working on sensor calibration for 14 straight days. The system kept producing readings that were off by several millimeters, a margin of error that could be fatal in cardiac procedures. I was sitting in the lab at 2 in the morning, surrounded by failed prototypes and technical specifications, when I finally understood the problem. The magnetic field sensors were being affected by the building's elevator system 20 floors below us. It took another 3 weeks to develop shielding that eliminated the interference without disrupting the sensor's accuracy. The breakthrough moment came after 18 months of failed attempts. I was testing prototype 18 when I finally cracked the sensor calibration problem. The key wasn't just isolating the sensors from external interference, but creating a dynamic calibration system that could adjust in real time as conditions changed during procedures. The system could track a catheter's position within 2 millimeters of accuracy while reducing radiation exposure by 85%. During our first successful test, a 3-hour procedure was completed in 45 minutes with unprecedented precision. But the real validation came during the human trials. I'll never forget the first patient, Mrs. Chen, a 73-year-old grandmother who needed a complex cardiac catheterization to clear multiple blockages. With traditional methods, the procedure would have required 4 hours under general anesthesia with significant radiation exposure. Using my guidance system, Dr. Martinez completed the entire procedure in 90 minutes with local anesthesia only. Mrs. Chen was awake and talking throughout the process, watching her own heart on the monitor as the catheter moved through her arteries with surgical precision. "It's like watching a GPS for my heart," she told me afterward, tears in her eyes. "You've given me my life back." That moment made every sleepless night, every failed prototype, every frustrating dead end worth it. I wasn't just building technology, I was creating miracles for people like Mrs. Chen. The numbers were staggering. Our system could reduce complications by 60%, cut recovery time in half, and potentially save the healthcare system millions of dollars annually. But beyond the statistics were the human stories. Patients who went home the same day instead of spending a week in the hospital. Families who didn't have to worry about radiation exposure affecting their loved ones. Surgeons who could perform procedures with confidence they'd never experienced before. I documented everything meticulously. Not just the technical specifications, but the human impact. Patient testimonials, surgeon feedback, efficiency improvements, cost savings analysis. I created a comprehensive database showing exactly how this technology could transform cardiac care. Every test result, every refinement, every breakthrough was logged in detailed reports that painted a picture of revolutionary advancement in medical care. But here's what really hurt: while I was buried in technical specifications and prototype testing, Mike and David were out there taking credit for their revolutionary innovation. At investor meetings, I was introduced as our talented engineer who helps implement our vision. In press interviews, they talked about our breakthrough technology without mentioning that I'd designed every component. I remember the first time I realized how completely they were erasing my contributions. We were at the Medical Device Innovation Summit, presenting to potential investors and industry partners. I'd been working for 36 hours straight to prepare the demonstration, debugging last-minute issues with the display interface and ensuring the system would perform flawlessly during the presentation. Mike stood on stage, speaking to an audience of 200 industry executives, venture capitalists, and medical professionals. He was eloquent and confident, describing the technology as if he'd conceived and developed every component himself. "Our revolutionary guidance system represents 4 years of intensive research and development," he said, gesturing toward the prototype I'd spent sleepless nights perfecting. "We identified the critical shortcomings in current catheter guidance technology and engineered a solution that will transform cardiac care." Our. As if he'd been in the lab struggling with sensor calibration and algorithm optimization. As if he understood the difference between magnetic field interference and ultrasound artifacts. As if he'd ever spoken to a patient whose life would be improved by this technology. During the Q&A session, Dr. William Hayes from Stanford Medical asked a highly technical question about the magnetic field sensor array configuration. Mike looked directly at me, expecting me to provide the answer, but then turned back to the audience and said, "That's exactly the kind of detailed implementation question our engineering team handles during the development process." Engineering team. As if there were dozens of people working on this project instead of primarily me, working alone in a lab for 4 years. When we returned to the office, I confronted him privately. "Mike, I need to talk to you about the presentation today." "What about it?" "I thought it went great." "Did you see how interested Goldman was? You talked about the technology as if you developed it yourself. You never mentioned my specific contributions." He looked genuinely confused. "Judith, you know we're a team. When I say we developed this, that includes you. But the audience doesn't know that. They think you're the technical genius behind this innovation. Does it really matter? We're all going to benefit when this succeeds. Does it matter?" For years of my life, and he wondered if recognition mattered. "It matters to me, Mike. I've sacrificed everything for this project. I haven't taken a real vacation in 3 years. I've missed family gatherings, turned down social invitations, dedicated my entire life to making this technology work. I deserve some acknowledgement for that." He sighed like I was being unreasonable. "Judith, you're a brilliant engineer, but you don't understand business. Investors want to see strong leadership. They want to believe in the founder's vision. If we start talking about individual contributions, it makes the company seem less cohesive. I'm not asking you to diminish your role. I'm asking you to acknowledge mine. Your role is acknowledged. Everyone knows you're our lead engineer. Lead engineer. Like I was interchangeable with any other qualified professional, instead of the person who'd literally invented the technology they were presenting. This pattern continued for months. Trade publications wrote articles about the innovative founders of MedFlow without mentioning my name. Industry newsletters featured Mike and David as visionary entrepreneurs revolutionizing cardiac care. Conference speakers referred to them as the brilliant minds behind breakthrough guidance technology. Meanwhile, I continued working 18-hour days, refining the system, solving complex technical challenges, and dealing with the endless details that made the difference between a promising prototype and a market-ready medical device. While they attended networking events and gave interviews, I was troubleshooting sensor calibration issues, optimizing processing algorithms, and working with hospital technicians to ensure the system could be operated reliably in real-world conditions. I told myself it didn't matter. We were friends, and when the money started flowing, they'd honor our agreement. I was naive enough to believe that loyalty meant something. The prototype testing phase lasted 8 months and required coordination with 3 major hospitals. I personally trained the cardiac surgeons on system operation, developed protocols for different types of procedures, and created troubleshooting guides for the technical staff. I was on call 24 hours a day for any issues that arose during testing, often driving to hospitals at 3 in the morning to resolve calibration problems or software glitches. Dr. Martinez at Cedars-Sinai became one of my strongest advocates. After using the system for 6 months, he told me privately, "Judith, in 30 years of cardiac surgery, I've never seen technology that makes such a dramatic difference in patient outcomes. You should be incredibly proud of what you've created." Created. He used that word specifically, acknowledging that this technology came from my mind and my efforts. Dr. Chen at Johns Hopkins was equally enthusiastic. "This guidance system has reduced our average procedure time by more than half while improving precision beyond anything I thought possible. The patient recovery rates are extraordinary. You've revolutionized interventional cardiology." Dr. Rodriguez at Boston Medical Center documented everything meticulously, tracking patient outcomes, procedure efficiency, and complication rates. Her 6-month report showed results that exceeded even my most optimistic projections. Procedure success rates improved by 73%. Patient satisfaction scores increased dramatically. Hospital costs per procedure dropped by 40% due to reduced operation times and faster recovery periods. I documented everything meticulously. Every test result, every refinement, every breakthrough was logged in detailed reports. When it came time to file the provisional patent application, I did what any engineer would do. I listed myself as the inventor and included all my technical documentation. It was standard procedure. The company would eventually file the full patent, but my name was on the provisional filing because, frankly, I was the one who invented it. I trusted Mike and David would handle the business side properly. I never imagined they were already planning to cut me out. 3.5 years in, with the patent application nearly complete and licensing discussions beginning, they called me into the conference room. "Judith, we need to talk about the profit-sharing arrangement," Mike said, not making eye contact. "We've been talking to our lawyers," David added, "and 30% just isn't feasible anymore. The development costs were higher than expected." I felt my stomach drop. "What are you saying?" "We're thinking more like 8% would be fair." 8%. From 30 to 8, just like that. "That's not what we agreed to," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've spent 4 years of my life on this. I designed every component, solved every technical challenge. This system exists because of my work." Mike leaned back in his chair with this condescending smile I'd never seen before. "Judith, you're a great engineer, but you're thinking too narrowly. This company succeeded because of our leadership, our business connections, our ability to secure funding. You implemented our vision." "Your vision?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I created this technology from scratch. You didn't even understand the basic principles when we started. Look, David interrupted, 8% is still a lot of money. We're talking millions in licensing deals. You should be grateful. Grateful. For being cheated out of what I'd earned. I stood up. I need time to think about this. Actually, Mike said, and his tone went cold, we need an answer today. The board is meeting tomorrow, and we need to finalize the ownership structure. The board. These two guys who'd been my friends since college were suddenly hiding behind the board. I can't agree to this, I said. It's not fair, and it's not what we agreed to. They exchanged a look I'll never forget. It was like watching two strangers discuss a business problem. Then I'm afraid we have to terminate your employment, David said. Effective immediately. The room went silent. For years of friendship, for years of 16-hour days, for years of believing we were building something together, and they fired me like I was some replaceable contractor. You can't be serious, I whispered. Judith, you're being emotional, Mike said. This is business. We'll provide excellent references, of course. Security escorted me out that afternoon. For years of my life, and I wasn't even allowed to say goodbye to the lab technicians I'd trained or retrieve my personal research notes. They handed me a cardboard box with my personal items, a coffee mug, a small plant, and a framed photo of my family, and walked me to the parking garage like I was some kind of security threat. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, staring at the building where I'd spent most of my adult life. The lab windows on the 7th floor were dark now, but I could picture every piece of equipment, every prototype, every failed experiment that had led to the breakthrough technology they were now claiming as their own. The drive home was surreal. I kept expecting my phone to ring, for Mike or David to call and say this was all a terrible misunderstanding. That they'd come to their senses and realized they couldn't possibly run a medical device company without understanding the technology they were trying to commercialize. But the call never came. I spent the next week in a fog of disbelief and rage. For years of friendship, for years of 16-hour days, for years of believing we were building something meaningful together, and they'd discarded me like an outdated piece of equipment. I'd given them everything, my expertise, my time, my trust, and they'd calculated that my contributions were worth exactly 8% of what we'd originally agreed. The worst part wasn't the money, though that stung. The worst part was realizing that our friendship had been conditional all along. They valued me as long as I was useful and compliant, but the moment I stood up for myself, I became expendable. These weren't random corporate executives making cold business decisions. These were people I'd trusted completely. We'd celebrated holidays together, supported each other through breakups, shared dreams about changing the world. I'd been the maid of honor at David's wedding. Mike had helped me move into my apartment. We'd spent countless evenings talking about our vision for improving healthcare and making a positive impact on the world. And they betrayed all of that for a larger percentage of profits from technology I'd created. I replayed our conversation over and over, analyzing every word, every expression, looking for signs I should have seen. The way Mike couldn't make eye contact when he delivered the ultimatum. The practiced way David presented their revised offer, as if they'd rehearsed the conversation. The cold dismissal when I refused to accept their terms. You're being emotional, Mike had said. As if wanting fair compensation for 4 years of groundbreaking work was somehow irrational. As if standing up for myself was a character flaw they couldn't tolerate. During that awful week, I found myself questioning everything. Had I been naive to trust them? Should I have demanded a written agreement from the beginning? Was I wrong to expect loyalty from people I'd considered family? But their problems were just beginning, and I was about to discover exactly how irreplaceable I really was. The first call came on Friday, just 3 days after they'd fired me. It was from Dr. Martinez at Cedars-Sinai. Judith, I'm calling because we're having some issues with the guidance system. The calibration seems off, and we're getting inconsistent readings. Mike said you're no longer with the company, but I was hoping you might have some insight. I explained that I couldn't help with proprietary technology one was no longer authorized to work on, but internally I knew exactly what was happening. The system required weekly recalibration using a specific protocol I'd developed. It wasn't in any manual because I'd been planning to train their technical team on the process once we began commercial production. By Monday, Dr. Chen called with similar problems. Then Dr. Rodriguez from the Boston facility. Each call revealed the same pattern: the guidance systems were failing in ways that made no sense to the replacement engineers Mike and David had hastily hired. "Judith, I hate to bother you," Dr. Chen said during our conversation, "but the new technical support person they sent doesn't seem to understand how the magnetic field calibration works. She kept referring to a manual that doesn't match what we're seeing on our system. Yesterday, we had to abort a procedure halfway through because the guidance readings became completely unreliable. This was my worst nightmare. Not for MedFlow, but for the patients whose lives depended on the technology working correctly. I designed every component of that system with surgical precision in mind. A calibration error could mean the difference between a successful procedure and a catastrophic complication. I'm sorry, Dr. Chen, but I can't provide technical support for proprietary technology I'm no longer authorized to work on. You'll need to work directly with MedFlow's support team. I understand, but I'm concerned about patient safety. We've invested significant resources in training our staff and modifying our procedures around this technology. If it's not reliable, we'll have to suspend the program entirely." Within 2 weeks, all 3 hospitals had suspended testing due to technical difficulties. The system I'd spent 4 years perfecting was collecting dust in hospital storage rooms because no one at MedFlow understood how to maintain it properly. The irony was devastating. Mike and David had convinced themselves that I was just an implementer, someone who could be easily replaced by any qualified engineer. They'd never bothered to understand the complexity of what I'd built or the institutional knowledge required to keep it functioning in real-world medical environments. Mike called me personally, trying to sound casual but clearly desperate. "Hey Judith, the doctors are having some calibration issues. Could you maybe write up a quick guide? As a favor?" A favor. After firing me for refusing to accept a grossly unfair contract modification, he wanted me to do him a favor. "I'm sorry, Mike," I said, keeping my voice professionally neutral, "but I'm no longer employed by MedFlow. You'll need to handle technical support through official channels." "Come on, don't be petty. This is about patient safety." Patient safety. The same patient safety he'd ignored when he fired the only person who truly understood the technology they were trying to commercialize. "If you're concerned about patient safety, you should have considered that before terminating the person who designed and maintained the system," I replied. "Judith, please. We made a mistake letting you go. Can't we work something out?" "You didn't make a mistake letting me go, Mike. You made a calculated decision that I was replaceable. Now you get to live with the consequences of that decision." The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably long. "What do you want?" he finally asked. "I want nothing from you," I said. "I want you to handle your technical support issues using the resources you chose to rely on when you decided my expertise wasn't worth what we'd originally agreed. I heard through a mutual friend that they'd hired 2 engineers to replace me. The first one lasted 3 weeks before realizing that the existing documentation was incomplete and the system was far more complex than he'd been told. The second engineer lasted 6 weeks and quit after she couldn't resolve basic calibration issues that I'd routinely handled. Within a month, both had quit. The system I'd spent 4 years perfecting was too complex for them to understand from the existing documentation, and without my institutional knowledge about the countless small modifications and workarounds I'd developed, they couldn't troubleshoot the inevitable technical issues that arose during real-world medical procedures. By the 3rd month, the situation had escalated beyond technical support problems. Dr. Martinez called me at home, and his tone was completely different from our previous conversations. "Judith, I don't know what's happening over there, but they sent an engineer who couldn't explain how the magnetic field sensors work. He kept referring to a manual that clearly didn't match the actual system we have installed. When I asked him about the calibration protocol you developed, he had no idea what I was talking about. That's when I learned about the licensing deals Mike and David had been secretly negotiating. They'd been telling potential partners that they were ready for commercial production, with reliable technical support and proven hospital implementations. They'd signed preliminary agreements with two major medical device companies worth $15 million each. Both deals were contingent on successful completion of the hospital trials and demonstration of reliable technical support capabilities. But without me, they couldn't even keep the existing prototypes operational, let alone support a commercial rollout to hundreds of hospitals. The fourth month brought desperation. David called, his voice strained. "Judith, we need to talk. Can we meet for coffee?" "I don't think that's appropriate," I said. "Please. Just hear us out. We made a mistake." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet. They looked terrible. Mike had dark circles under his eyes, and David kept fidgeting with his phone. They'd always been confident, even arrogant, but now they seemed deflated. "The licensing deals are falling through," Mike admitted. "The hospitals can't complete the trials without technical support." "That's unfortunate," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "We want you back," David said quickly. "Full salary restoration, and we'll honor the original 30% agreement." I almost laughed. "You fired me for refusing to accept 8%. Now you're offering 30? "We were under pressure from investors," Mike said. "We made a poor decision." "You made a calculated decision," I corrected. "You thought I was replaceable." "Please, Judith. We're friends. We've been friends for years." "Friends." They actually used that word. "Friends don't fire each other for standing up for themselves," I said. "Friends don't lie about ownership agreements." I stood to leave, but David grabbed my arm. "The company will collapse without you. Everything we built together will be worthless." "You built this company," I reminded him. "I was just implementing your vision, remember?" That's when the calls started getting interesting. Dr. Martinez contacted me again, but this time with a different proposition. "Judith, I've been following what happened with MedFlow, and frankly, I'm disgusted. You created something revolutionary, and they treated you terribly. I'm on the advisory board for Cardiac Dynamics. They're interested in discussing licensing opportunities for guidance system technology. Would you be willing to have a conversation?" Cardiac Dynamics. They were a major player in the medical device industry, with manufacturing capabilities and distribution networks that MedFlow could never match. More importantly, they had a reputation for treating their engineers with respect. "I'd be happy to discuss it," I said, "but I should mention that I hold the provisional patent rights to the technology." There was a pause. "You hold the rights? Not MedFlow?" "I'm the inventor listed on the provisional filing. MedFlow never completed the rights assignment process." "Judith, I think we need to have a very serious conversation." The meeting with Cardiac Dynamics changed everything. Their legal team confirmed what I'd suspected, since I'd never signed over my patent rights and MedFlow had fired me before completing the formal assignment. I retained ownership of the technology. "This is a $15 million technology," their chief counsel explained. "If you're willing to license exclusively to us, we can offer you a signing bonus of $2 million plus 12% royalties on all sales. 12% royalties on what could be hundreds of millions in revenue, versus 8% of licensing profits from a company that was rapidly failing." The decision was easy. 2 weeks later, I signed the licensing agreement with Cardiac Dynamics. They immediately filed a cease and desist order against MedFlow, preventing them from using or marketing my technology. Mike called me that afternoon, screaming, "You can't do this. That's our technology. We funded the development." "Actually, Mike, it's my technology. I invented it, I filed the provisional patent, and I own the rights. You chose to fire me rather than honor our agreement. We'll sue you." "With what money? Your licensing deals just evaporated, and you can't operate without the technology one developed." The silence on the other end was deafening. Judith, please, he said finally, his voice breaking. We made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can work together. You had 4 years to work together, I said. You chose to work against me instead. But we're friends. No, Mike. We were friends. Friends don't treat each other the way you treated me. Medflow declared bankruptcy 6 months later. Both licensing deals fell through, investors pulled their funding, and they couldn't develop any competing technology without infringing on my patents. I, meanwhile, was thriving. Cardiac Dynamics offered me a position as Senior Director of Innovation, overseeing the commercialization of my guidance system. My salary was triple what Medflow had paid me, and for the first time in my career, my contributions were properly recognized. The system launched 18 months later. Within the first year, it was being used in over 200 hospitals worldwide. Procedure times decreased by an average of 65%, complications dropped by 58%. And patient satisfaction scores improved dramatically. The technology I developed was saving lives every day. The royalty checks were substantial, but the recognition meant more. Medical journals featured articles about breakthrough innovations in cardiac catheterization. I was invited to speak at conferences, consulted on industry panels, and genuinely respected for my expertise. Last month, I ran into David at a medical device conference. He looked older, tired. He approached me hesitantly. Judith, I owe you an apology, he said. We treated you terribly. You deserved better, especially from friends. I studied his face. He seemed genuinely remorseful. I appreciate the apology, David, I said. I hope you learned something from the experience. I did. We both did. Too late, but we learned. I'm glad to hear that. He nodded awkwardly and started to walk away, then turned back. For what it's worth, you deserved all the success you've achieved. You always did. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. But as I watched him disappear into the